Thank you for that. Mayor Gove, would you take the podium?
Okay. Bear with me while I get this set up here. Good evening, councilors. Thank you, Council President. I did warn the President before the meeting started that this is not a short presentation. There's more to this than just the FY26 budget. Some higher level, bigger picture data in here and some community comparisons, statewide averages and things like that that I just wanted to take the opportunity to review with you. We otherwise spend all of this time doing this work behind the scenes, and when we get here we really do just talk about the current fiscal year and we sort of take this on a year-by-year basis. I want us to just zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture. So I'm going to do my best to try to not lose you in the weeds here. I was doing this over the weekend at home, and I was at the computer looking at all these charts, and I said, God, I love this stuff. And we were at a meeting this morning with the mayors, and we were talking about where the data comes from in the Schedule A and the LA4, and we all looked at each other and said, God, we're just really geeks. And we all knew what that language was, what forms those were, and where that data came from. So again, I'll try not to lose you for everybody watching, but I think this is really helpful for everybody to just start wrapping their brains around. This is what we're going to cover tonight, and CFO Marissa Batista will join me for a bit of this, and we'll sort of tag team here. So we're going to go over the FY26 budget, the bluff. I take this from our police chief. It's the bottom line up front, so I'll give you those numbers right away so you know what we're looking at. Then we're going to talk about where the money goes, why your taxes are so high. These are the questions you probably hear from your constituents, right? Where does all the money go? Why are my taxes so high? Then we're going to talk about who pays the bill. So we get to learn a little bit more about the demographics and people who live in Amesbury, why they ask those questions. And then we'll, again, go through the 26 budget in a little more detail like I typically do, the capital improvement plan for the FY26 time period, our financial forecast, and I'll come back to do a little review of where we go from here. So what we're looking at for FY26 is an increase in our operating fund, our general fund budget of 5.2% for a budget of $83,841,959. And I forgot that I added animations. So that's our budget there with an increase of 5.2%. We're using $1.1 million of free cash to balance this budget. So throughout the budget process, you've heard people say, just use the free cash. You have so much free cash, just use the free cash. We've talked over and over about how what we have in free cash is not that much free cash in terms of financial policy, but we have used $1 million of free cash last year. We got to the end, we could not find more corners to cut to balance this budget. We added another $100,000 in to use $1.1 million to balance this budget.
Late by 2 minutes.
We've left ourselves with $35,000 in the levy. $35,900. Yes.
Madam Mayor, my apologies. Just want to let the record show that 719, Councilor Stanganelli has joined us. Please continue. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. That is not a lot of money. That is not a lot of wiggle room. I have been in trainings and webinars and sessions. DLS has said they actually consider leaving less than 1.5% in your levy being taxed to the limit. So we are well below that, but that's what we're leaving. So this is what we have as our budget picture for the year. So what are we spending our money on? This is actually pulled from FY24 data. I wanted to do some comparison, and that's the last fiscal year that is certified. So this is FY24, just to give you a picture of our expenditures by function. This is reported by DLS, and they take this from Schedule A. So this is how every municipality is reporting their expenses to the state, and we can say this is an apples to apples comparison. Okay, so in FY24 for the city of Amesbury, we spent 53.47% of our budget on education. That's the big red mark there. It takes up most of everyone's pie chart. It starts with blue for general government at the top, so that's the 4.11, and then it goes around clockwise. So public safety for us was the 13.22, the education was the big one, public works at 5.66, and then lots of little pieces of the pie. Pay attention to the gray piece of the pie, that's fixed costs. Fixed costs include health insurance, pension assessments, unemployment, workers' comp, life insurance, Medicare, and liability insurance. So those are what we have for fixed costs. You'll notice the first comparison I have is Newburyport. As a neighboring community, lots of people like to compare us to Newburyport. They are spending less on education, more on fixed costs, less on public safety, and more on public works. So you can see where things contract and expand. And their budget overall, $10 million more than ours. But I'm going to run through a few different communities for you. Education, just as a note, education here includes our Amesbury Public Schools as well as our school assessments. So for Amesbury, that means Whittier and Essex Aggie. It does not include charter school assessments because those appear as a state assessment. And that would be what color is that? The intergovernmental assessments. The state assessments is the olivey green color at the top. So for us, it's the 5.72%. For Newburyport, it's only 2.68. Okay, so that's the very last one. Intergovernment assessments is our state assessments. So that's comparing us to Newburyport. This one here, I left Amesbury on the left as a control, so you can see how we compare to other communities. This is now Salisbury, and you can see Salisbury is maybe the one that stands out the most when I click through these. Their public safety costs in particular are quite large. Their education, again, smaller. It's very similar to us in terms of public works. Overall, their budget, though, half the size. Okay? Then you have Georgetown, much smaller community, again, half the size of our budget, but very similar in terms of education, a little bit lower in terms of public safety, and otherwise much smaller in terms of public works. But look at their gray piece of the pie. Their fixed costs are very large. Yeah. You're going to see that again. Danvers. Every once in a while you hear someone say Danvers, right? Like big city, lots of commercial, industrial base. Very hard to compare us to. Look at the size of their budget, $119 million. Their education piece of the pie, a little bit smaller. The big one here, again, that stands out is their fixed cost at 19%. Gardner, Massachusetts is actually a very good comparison for us on paper by size and population. Budget, their budget is very similar to ours. You're going to see in another comparison where they really differ. But education a little bit lower, public safety similar, public works similar, huge fixed costs. So for us, for fixed costs, that's good. Ours is low. Hard to compare us to, everyone would pick out a different selection of communities, so I don't want you to think we're cherry picking. So here's just a state average. I just pulled all 351. There were a few towns that were not reporting. I took them out, and this is what you get for a comparison. In general, for the communities that I did compare us to, we are spending more on education than any of those communities. Our fixed costs are lower than all of those communities. Our public works was sort of middle of the road. We spend more than most of those communities on public safety, and we spend less than all of them on general government. Those are the people who keep the place running, right? So like the gears behind closed doors. So, not closed doors, I shouldn't say that. The gears behind the scenes. For the state averages, we spend less than average on general government. We spend more than average on public safety, more than average on education, less than average on public works, less than average on fixed costs, and more than average on the state assessments. Overall, I'd say our pie chart is not dramatically different Then in these other communities, again, it's all proportionate. That's why this is a good way to sort of check and, for checks and balances. Again, Salisbury might be the only one that really stands out as having more in public safety, and they have a beach that has a lot of activity. So we could generally understand why that might be, right? So that's what we pay for. So then, how do we pay these bills? Where is the money coming from? As we build a budget, we are at the same time generating a revenue projection to determine how we can balance those two numbers. And in general, we estimate our local receipts and other revenues before we get our state assessments, before we determine what we can assess to the levy. So you can see here what that sort of fluctuation has looked like. We do rely heavily on property taxes. There is a projected increase in local receipts this year with a decrease in reliance on property taxes. I tried to put in this sort of high water mark for you so you could see in 24 and 25, 23 to 25 really. And there's a chart in the budget book that has numbers assigned to this where you could see it maybe in more detail. How much of our budget is being made up by taxes, property taxes, and the levy. It's down 1% in this year's projections, but I'm going to run through revenue as a pie chart in comparison for you, and you'll see where other communities are relying less on their tax levy, and that's something for us to learn more about and look into and continue to develop these other receipts. And that when we come to you and we are increasing fees and looking at things for the clerk's office or the treasurer's office that haven't been updated in 20 and 30 years, that is the piece of the pie that we're trying to grow, right? We're trying to make up for and reduce that burden on the tax levy. So that's a pie chart there. You can see this is our reliance on the levy. We get the automatic 2.5%, which was $1.4 million. Then we get our new growth, which is an estimate we determine, based on actuals and projections that we know are coming. We're estimating $750,000. So the projected levy increase for the city of Amesbury for FY26 is $2.1 million, but our budget is going up by $4.1 million. So that extra $2 million has to be made up by those other revenue sources, state aid, local receipts, and other revenue. So if we just had that 2.5 off the levy, we aren't going to get very far. And you can see where if you're relying so heavily on the levy, it doesn't get you very far, okay? So this is just a rundown quickly of what those different revenue sources are. There we are. The property taxes obviously is our major source. Like I said, local receipts, it does include motor vehicle excise. In some of our charts, we separate motor vehicle excise. It's just that it's such a big number for us that they historically sort of pulled that out and itemized it for you. Again, fees, permits, investment income. One of the things that we're projecting to increase is permits. As we see new growth increase, they need building permits and they pay permit fees, so that goes sort of hand in hand. State aid is a diminishing piece of our budget, but we do get a portion of our budget from the state. There's a variety of sort of common sources from state aid that you may be familiar with or have heard of. UGA, which is unrestricted general government aid. There's a growing conversation about UGA as the state works through their budget process, and then of course Chapter 70, Chapter 90, and there's other things that are specific to veterans, libraries, and other cost centers. Then there's other available revenue, which could be free cash, transfers from other funds. In the past few years, it's included ARPA, CPA funds, and enterprise funds, other things. There will be communities that have, they have parking revenue, they have beaches, they have golf courses, right? So it depends on your community what types of revenue you might have. We don't have any of the three that I just mentioned, but if you're looking at different communities and you're trying to compare, that's when you get into a situation where it's really not apples to apples, but they could be relying less on their tax levy because they have a lot of other options. So when you start to compare communities, I'm going to keep the same communities that I had the last go around. So you've got Amesbury and Newburyport here. For reliance on the tax levy, again, these are from FY24 as the last certified fiscal year. For Amesbury, we were relying on our tax levy for 66% of our budget. Newburyport was relying on it for 62%. You can see the yellow portion, which is the other CPA and enterprise, is larger for them. Otherwise, they're getting less state aid, but really they're getting a lot more out of the other CPA and enterprise, okay? The next one is Salisbury, again relying a little bit less on their tax levy, getting a lot more out of the other enterprise and CPA funds. Georgetown, they're a little bit more like us, but a lot less on their tax levy there. Danvers getting a lot more out of their CPA, other, and local receipts, but they get less state aid. Gardner, look at that state aid number. They are only relying on their levy for 37% of their budget. So you can see how state aid makes a huge difference in how your revenue shapes up and what you're relying on. So in Amesbury, you could say, well, we're relying a lot on our levy. How do you grow the other pieces of the pie? The state aid, not a lot changing. It's actually diminishing, right? So when we look at local receipts and other, some of those things we may move the needle on, but it might not be by very much. So we're going to dive more into the tax levy. And who pays the bills? We all know that our tax levy is limited by Prop 2.5, and how that increase is calculated and where we get our value is assessed by the per $1,000. So the assessed value of your community really matters. Again, if you're going to calculate it based on the $1,000 that you have per $1,000. So this is all, again, I stuck with FY24, so we're all on the same page. So these numbers have definitely changed. Everything's gone up. But if you start with Amesbury versus Newburyport, Newburyport's assessed value is twice as much of Amesbury's. Twice as much. Their portion of the pie, to residential, to commercial, I mean, residential looks relatively similar, but again, twice as much in value. Salisbury, a little bit lower than us, a lot more in commercial. Look at how much bigger the green piece of the pie is. Looking at Georgetown, and again, proportionately, smaller budget and smaller overall value. Danvers is where you see the presence of the commercial and the industrial piece of their levy, and more than double our value. And Gardner is smaller overall and less proportionately of residential. So if you put these all, this is actually a chart I made a few years ago. Actually, I think Anne-Marie made it to start with. This we presented to our legislators. So these are all the communities. These are the communities I just presented, but more. These are the communities that are represented by our state reps and our senator. So Essex County is a big place. It gets us down into Cape Ann and Swampscott, right? Those are not Marblehead. Those are not good comparisons for us. So this is this neck of the woods, plus the last few that I had just popped on there. So if you look at this group of communities and you consider our assessed values, we're kind of smack in the middle. Closer to a place like Salisbury or Boxford than we are to Newburyport or North Andover. But we're more often compared to Newburyport or North Andover than we are to a place like Salisbury or Boxford or West Newbury, right? So something to keep in mind as you're considering the weight of the bill and our taxes, the amount of services that we offer, and how that impacts somebody's wallet. We're offering the level of services of a Newburyport and North Andover on the shoulders and the budget of a place like Salisbury and Boxford. This, I layered two different things in here. So this is just to reiterate really what I just said. This actually pulls in, so this is where you get into where you have people commenting on, my tax bill is so high, right? I'm paying so much in taxes. This is pulled from the state, and they pull in our income per capita, and they calculate our tax bill as a percentage of income. So this just has our, that'll be the next slide. So the first we have our tax bill on a average single family home. So there where we are in the orange, this is numerically, we are towards the bottom there based on our income per capita. So again, our income looks more like Merrimack and Salisbury, whereas our bill, which is the, this is again a few years old, the $9,111 fits more in with the new report in North Andover. So our income per capita has us all the way to the right, but our bill has us farther to the left. If you just take that average tax bill as a percentage of income, we are the farthest to the left. The highest percentage of our income per capita for the city of Amesbury, we have the highest bill per income. And that is why people will say, right, my tax bill's so high. Because on average, 1 out of every $5 that an Amesbury resident earns is going to pay their property taxes. Not just their housing costs, and I'm going to talk about cost burden for homeowners and renters too, but that's just on their tax bill. Okay? So this is some demographic information about that, what we know about households being cost burden and who lives here, again, who's paying this bill. And this is why I get worried about our budgets. Right, who's gonna pay the bill and can they afford it? This was pulled from an RKG report on housing when we were doing the at home in Amesbury. I pulled out highlights for us. So as far as our population, we know that we have an aging population in Amesbury. We have seen a decrease of 436 residents in the age group of 35 to 44, but we have seen an increase of 1,456 residents over the age of 55. You can assume that those individuals have smaller family sizes, they have different needs for their housing, they're occupying smaller units, and a whole host of other things, right? They need more services, there's all sorts of things that could go with that. Our household income has, in general, has become increasingly wealthier, but the fastest growing has been in households earning over $200,000, while middle income households have decreased, showing that difficulty that they're having to stay in Amesbury to pay the bills and find somewhere comfortable to live. Households, this is all pulled from census data, so 2011 to 2021. Households between 2011 and 2021, the number of households has increased by 783 households, but the average household size has decreased for homeowners from 2.68 to 2.51, and for renters from 1.79 to 1.92. When we get into more of the housing information and what we have going on, what we're presenting, you'll see the shift from 3+ bedrooms to studios, 1s and 2s. So we are sort of filling that gap. That's that need for missing middle housing. You're going to see that in the developments that we have, but it's also something to think about when you think about someone who may have had a spouse at home and now they are paying the bill on their own, right? The demand for things like our senior tax work-off program, right? Though these things are demonstrating the need for programs like that and showing us who's living here in our community. For vacancy, the total number of units increased by 543 units, but the available units dropped from 295 to 117. So we're building units and there's more available, but they're getting occupied as fast as they're being built, right? The demand is there, so we know that. Think about cost burden, we can see that people are moving into homes that they can't afford. They are competing for the same housing because we have such a shortage. People are moving into homes that are above their price range, and for people who have a higher household budget but can't find something in their budget, they are buying something or moving into something below their budget, so everyone's competing for the same units. So we have 24% of our renter-occupied households are severely cost burdened, over 50% of their household income is going to housing costs. Another 22% spend 30 to 50% of their income on housing. So 24% are severely cost burdened, and another 22% are spending 30 to 50% of their income on their housing. When you look at households or owner-occupied households, they're less likely to be cost burdened. However, there's still 8% of them that are severely cost burdened, and another 19% are spending 30 to 50% of their income on their housing. This slide probably should have been a little bit earlier. This is the total value of our average single-family homes. You can see that it's going up. Again, we derive our tax levy off of the assessed values based on the per $1,000 worth of value, and you can just see how this has increased. And there's been some pretty big jumps in the last couple of years. Again, worried about cost burden, and also just thinking about how the levy grows. So I'll move into the FY26 budget. All of that will be helpful as I come back at the end to sort of talk about where we go from here. But we have developed a budget that takes away some of the safety nets that we have historically had. We built a budget that I would say is unlike anything my administration has built before. We are working in an environment that is very uncertain, more than ever. I had heard of a state legislator who said, we're building a budget on quicksand. There's just a ton of uncertainty here. I fully expect that we will need to make changes in this. The way that the Senate budget came out was more challenging for us than the House budget. It's not typically how things go. It usually gets better as it gets developed. Again, I told you how much we left in our levy. Based on the Senate budget, we would be over, and we would be looking at cuts from this budget. So we have made this very tight. All budgets are very tight this year, and we'll need to talk about that again after you hear more about the details. So this is what we have for our budget. Again, $83,841,959. We increased it by 5.2%. We are using a lot of free cash, and we left ourselves very little room in the levy. For budget highlights, and you'll find some of this in the letters that open the budget book, we have 5 collective bargaining agreements that are currently being negotiated. The new contracts are effective July 1st. If they are not settled by July 1st, when they are settled, the settlements would be retroactive to be effective as of that date. Because of that, the salaries are primarily level funded with a salary reserve that was increased for the processing of transfers at a later date. Keep in mind, anyone in a union, for the most part, union members get step increases absent the sort of annual increase that they may get. So step increases are included, so that's considered. But otherwise, we're working on negotiations, and they are actively ongoing. For the budget comparison, you'll notice in the header of the spreadsheets that everything is compared to a revised budget, including appropriations as of March 31st. So if there have been budget line transfers or council orders, those are taken into consideration. So if you are looking to compare to last year's budget, it will look different. Budget line transfer is if someone says, well, I didn't need as much money in my office supplies, but my conference cost more this year. It's all in part 2. They don't have to come back here for a transfer from you. They can just move that money around. And then a council order you're familiar with, if they had to move it from part 1 to part 2, they needed to come back here. So those would be accounted for. For capital this year, we took all capital out of the budget. Again, something we've never done before. So we took the capital out, and we filed a separate council bill to fund it with free cash. It's over $1.8 million. So if you take that and you add it to the 1.1, that we're using to balance the budget. We are using $2.9 million in this budget. We're using $2.9 million in this budget. We also removed safety nets fiscal safety nets that we typically include, like budgeting for sick leave buyout. So if we anticipate a retirement, we can project what their buyout might be, and we include that in the budget for when it comes up. There are times that retirement does not actually happen. They decide, with an economy like today, they might want to work a little bit longer. And so what we decided was we're not going to plan for those. We are going to handle them as they come, which means that when it happens, we'll have to find the money. So that means our departments might be shorthanded for longer. They'll have to wait to rehire because they'll need to use the money in their salary account to pay for that buyout. We may need transfers from free cash. And we'll have to find ways to make it work. So we've done things like that. We have, however, continued to our payment plans towards OPEB and the pension liability and things like that. So, we are walking a line of ensuring that we are following strong financial practices and looking out for the future of our city, but, while also trying to really make ends meet and deliver on quality services that our residents and businesses expect. For, because Prop 2.5 limits our growth, it limits the levy, we rely on new growth and what we can do to encourage development. So there are investments in OSED and DPW. There's new staff there. There's labor. There's engineers. We've retained the special projects, the senior project manager, to make sure that those projects are coming to fruition, that we can finish projects that are on our plate and move all those things forward in a expeditious manner so that we have a reputation for delivering and more people want to come here and invest in our city. Federal and state aid. Again, the Senate budget was not favorable for us. House Ways and Means was better. This was built on the House Ways and Means budget. For federal funding, we, on the city side, do not, for the most part, do not rely on federal funds for operating. We have a few federal grants. I explained them in the letter. They are all approaching a grant cycle where we're spending down funds that we may be reapplying. We might be waiting for the opportunity to reapply. But for the most part, I feel okay about where we're at. There's obviously a lot of question marks about what might be next. And our school department does rely on federal funds for their operating account, over $1 million. So there could still be some substantial challenges in this budget. I will say I've heard there are conversations about the aggressive funding schedule for things like OPEB and pension, where cities and towns are so strapped, things are so tight, but we are following these payment plans, and perhaps we could stretch those out a little longer, pay less on an annual basis, and be able to fund more of today's expenses. But I don't know how far that will go. So there is a lot of conversation happening about what can be done to sort of alleviate some of the pressure on cities and towns, but I don't think it's going to be by way of cash. So keep that in mind. There's no one coming to our rescue here. Health insurance benefit costs increased by 13.6%. That was the largest single-year increase that we have experienced in many years. I will say that in other communities, they have seen increases closer to 20%. So we were on the lower end, between 10 and 13%. The other thing that we took out, if you're really looking at the details in there, was the funding of the Shea Memorial escrow account, which we had been funding year over year for the last 3 to 4 years. For maintenance, particularly of the parking lot that requires a special vacuuming treatment, I'll say. We have $70,000 in that account at this point, and this was the first year that they went out to to find a vendor to actually do the work, and it was less than $1,000. So we're not funding it for a while. So we took that out. So there's things we took out. I mean, we looked at everything. We took it out if we could, and some of it I feel more comfortable with than others, but we're trying to stretch as far as we can. So when we build our budget, the departments, some might call this a zero-based budget, some might not, but our department heads go through line by line and they put in everything that they need. So this is an example from our SoftWrite accounting software of the police custodial supplies. You can see everything he has in here: mop heads, he has trash bags, 1 case of small, 1 case of large per month. So he itemizes everything. A roll of paper towels, 1 case per month. And it rolls up and gets you to that $4,772. This is an example of the fire ambulance equipment supplies line, and you can see this: the hand tubby, the radio tower rental, the EMS supplies, Pro EMS, the Zols, the air gas, which is the medical use oxygen that they have, all these different things in here, itemized. This is the library building maintenance, and this is an interesting one. You can see some red numbers at the bottom. Those are the things that I removed, that I cut. So they have everything itemized: cleaning supplies, pest control, the LW bills. It's the fire alarm system maintenance contract. We pay someone to go out and cover the fountain in front of the library for the winter. They have historic front doors. They have the yearly maintenance on those. We have some things we moved out of the library's maintenance and we moved it into the DPW budget. So the Bartlett tree care, there's a very special tree in front of the library which requires certain maintenance. That was moved into the tree budget at the DPW. The AC units, we made that a capital request. It's in the free cash transfer as a capital, and then we reduced other things. You can see negative, negative, negative. So I reduced 12 different departments' budgets from what they requested to get this to balance. And here's an example from IT. They have a computer systems support line. It is a large line. For the most part, every other city department includes their software in this line, so it's covered by IT. So IT has eyes on it. We're tracking the renewals. IT reviews the contracts, and we don't have duplication. We know what's going on with software. So you can see all of these itemized things like Office 365. Those are our emails. OpenGov, SoftWrite, Archive Social, AutoCAD for our architects, and lots of different things. Civic Plus, that's our website. So again, itemized by department. So, and that's just a handful to give you an example of what our department heads go through to build their budget. I won't bore you by doing this again. That's our revenue. Some tax concepts and terms. I've been using these. If they're foreign to you, I apologize. New growth is additions to the tax base from new construction or property improvements. So these could be someone adding a back deck, renovating a kitchen. It could be a brand new single family house or more. So it's an addition to the tax base, something new. The levy is the revenue that we raise through real and personal property taxes. The levy limit is the maximum amount that we can raise each year. That is a historic number, so it grows automatically by the 2.5% plus the new growth. They also add debt exclusions, and that's calculated on that chart that appears in the budget book. Excess levy capacity, we've talked about how we don't have much of that. We really don't have any left. And that is just that calculation. And the debt exclusion is a temporary increase to the levy. It's something we would have voted on at a ballot, and it's temporary. It goes away when the debt is paid off. And I think Marissa's going to talk more about that. Again, we've seen this, so this is our revenue source history, and that appears in the budget book as well. This is that calculation of the levy. So the automatic 2.5% is the 1.4 million. The new growth we've projected is the 750. We are using $61,578,829 out of the levy, and that leaves us with the excess levy capacity of $35,000. This is, so now we've moved into sort of state aid. This is the cherry sheet and the changes that we have seen. We track this year to year. I track the net cherry sheet numbers. I don't know if anybody else looks at it that way, but when you get your assessments and you get your aid and you just do the math, you know, where do you come out in the end? So we are actually getting less money now than we were in 2011. So the blue line shows the net balance of what we're getting off of the cherry sheet. The orange line is maybe a little misleading. It's the increase or decrease. So last year, our cherry sheet was down 0.13%. This year, it's down 0.01%. So it looks like it's going up. It's just not down as much. But overall, we're down and sort of losing money again on the state side when we're looking at our revenue picture, which, as we've seen, sort of it puts pressure on the tax levy, which is on our residents, and we've seen they don't have money to give. This is a picture of other revenue history. Just looking back to 2020, you can see in 2020, 2021, remember there was a global pandemic happening. There was a lot of uncertainty. We were passing 1/12 budgets. We sort of scraped the barrel. We were using some stabilization funds. We were using surplus overlay for capital. There wasn't a lot of free cash back then. You know, my first year in office, free cash closed from the year prior at like $200,000. So we didn't have money to play with. Then the last 2 years, we had ARPA funds. So you'll see that we were using ARPA funds. And there's nothing in those boxes really for this year, or in the last couple of years here, and in FY26. So that money's all gone. We're relying really heavily on the top end of this for other revenue sources, which is just our revolving accounts. And again, that, if you think about that pie again, puts that pressure on the tax levy and the importance of growing our other revenue. This is a chart of these other revenue sources going back farther. And the only thing that stood out to me here, I mean, we were using lots of different accounts on a variety of years, but that in FY17 and 18, there was over $1 million of use to balance the budget. 1.5 and $1.4 million, about $1.5 million was being used to balance the budget in both of those years. So I just want to point that out. Again, there was lots of other funds being used to sort of balance things, but we've seen this ebb and flow of reliance on free cash, and we really shouldn't be doing that. So big picture, looking at our departments, the public schools, and you're going to hear this in hearings, and that's where you'll get really into the weeds, so I'll try to sort of breeze through this. For the school department, they started with a level services budget of 8.44%. The school committee voted on 7.71. They made a few changes to moving things around. I've recommended 5%. It is more than I've ever been able to recommend. Again, we've really pushed ourselves to the limit here, but doing as much as we can. It is an increase in their budget, but lots of people would say it's not enough. In terms of dollar amount, that is an increase, or the difference between the school committee's recommendation and my recommendation is about $1 million. But we can't find $1 million. So that's our gap. This is a chart of enrollment. The school department has seen a decline in enrollment of 489 students over the last 10 years. There is a projection that shows a stabilization. State aid is driven by enrollment. We have been advocating heavily for the opening of Chapter 70 formula at the State House. It's not gaining a lot of traction. We are, I'd say, very happy that the Senate and the House have come to an agreement on a per pupil number in their budget discussion. They've both proposed $150 per person, per pupil. So it sort of takes that off the table when they go to conference committee, which is great. Usually that's a negotiating chip, but they've agreed at $150 per pupil, but that's per pupil. So when we have less pupils, then we get, less money. So just of note there, this is a historic look at the budget increases the school department has seen up until 2025. I didn't include this year, but I'll show you that on the next chart. So there's 2 years where my recommendation differed from what was awarded by the council. And that is where in one of our charts you'll see sort of a hockey stick of how the levy decreased, because we took a big chunk out of it in one of those years. But overall, over the last 8 years, there's been an $8.2 million increase in the school budget. So again, we are adding to the school budget, but the argument we continue to hear is that it's not enough. If you add in this year with the 5%, it increases their average, the average increase goes up to 3.37% and over $10 million. I think that's something to be proud of. Again, I know the argument is that it's not enough, but we have increased the budget by $10 million. The 5%, if you're reading the newspapers, it's more than you're seeing any of their neighboring communities propose for school department budgets, and we are doing the best we can with what we have. The Mass Library state aid, again, just a few details about other accounts so that you know why we got to the numbers that we did. Mass General Law states that municipalities must appropriate a figure of at least the average of the last 3 years of municipal appropriations to the library operations, increased by 2.5% in order to certify the state aid to public libraries. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy here. So the more we go, so I have really tried to hold us to them. It's the MAR, M-A-R is what that stands for there. I've really tried to hold us to the MAR because the more we go up, the more we're forced to go up in the next year's MAR calculation, which is challenging when we know that resources are limited and there's not enough to go around if I have a calculation, over here that is forcing me into a number. And that's why I make that decision. This year, we are funding above the MAR. So here's the MAR calculation at $914,360, and I thought I had the number of what I funded, but I don't. But we are funding above the MAR. Just for context, the increase there. So yeah, that's the increase in just the MAR was $9,500. The contractual step increases alone for the library employees is $8,000. So funding just to the MAR was not going to get us very far. For the fire department, that's when you talk to your constituents, you hear people say, "Well, where's all the money go?" And again, why are my taxes so high? We are a very full service community. We have our own school department. Our students don't go to regional schools. We have an ambulance company. We have curbside trash pickup. We have these things that our neighbors don't have. So just to sort of highlight the fire department and the ambulance service that we provide, every member of our fire department staff is an EMT or a paramedic, as well as being, of course, a fully trained firefighter. So every member is considered a dual role member. It means that any one of them can respond if a fire happens and provide fire suppression, and any one of them can respond to a medical call and assist a patient. Dual role they've looked at this in studies, and the dual role personnel provides approximately 20% more work per hour compared to departments with similar demographics that do not provide an ambulance service. So if you think about a staff who is sitting there waiting for a fire, but if they're sitting there waiting for a fire and a medical call, then 20% more of their time they are out and not sitting there waiting for a call because they can respond to a different variety of calls. Year to date, our ambulance has responded to 806 calls for service, and we report the expenses for our ambulance on an annual basis, and our last certified report saw that our expenses were $432,000, but our revenue is just over $1 million. So just something to consider, we have a highly skilled ambulance company, and as things change with community hospitals and neighboring hospitals, just in general with the healthcare system, more and more people will rely on 911 service. If you're not sure that you're going to make it to a nearby hospital, if you're not sure which hospital to go to for the right type of care, if you can't get a hold of your doctor, you're going to call 911. And our ambulance service will become more and more relied upon for pre-hospital care. Having our own is highly valuable versus relying on a regional private vendor. And we have lots of studies that talk about this. You will hear more from the fire department. Obviously, they are under a SAFER grant right now that increased their staffing. That is expiring, and we are watching that very closely. So they'll talk more about that. They did a quick comparison for me. Just like I said, it is you're getting more out of the staff, and we have the revenue. So this was just a quick comparison to communities who they felt were good comparisons. Some of them do, and some of them do not offer an ALS ambulance. We don't offer BLS, we offer ALS. And you can see that our run volume is higher. Our FTEs those are also slightly higher, even than Foxborough, but our annual budget is lower than Foxborough. They are the other one that offers an ambulance, and our ambulance revenue, again, is $1.4 million. And I will send you these slides. I know I'm throwing a ton of data at you. It's like death by charts. Other things to note, the recreation department is entirely funded by the revenue that they generate, so we transfer in a matching amount to what they are spending. The before and after school program is changing management this year, which may result in changes moving forward. And inspectional services charges fees for their work. We talked about permits. So they are largely, if not entirely, funded by the revenue that's generated in a given year, but that just goes really into the general fund. And up here again is licenses and permits. This is a demonstration of our departmental budgets. We had, just on this slide, there are 6 departments taking reductions or taking a 0% increase in their budget. Our Council on Aging has a decrease, our Conservation Department has a decrease, and Admin and Finance has a decrease. That actually, for the most part, is being transferred to Human Resources. We established a HR as its own department, so we took the money out of A&F and moved it over to HR. We have zeros for the Harbor Master and the Health Department, and IT and Assessor. You've got a lot of them in there, like point something, under 1% increase. That just shows you the money sort of transferring from Admin and Finance over to HR. This is the same chart, really, but in dollars instead of percentages. You can see that although on this chart the public schools sort of blend in at a 5%, it looks like OSED's getting a lot more. They're getting a 15% increase. Again, really focused on making sure that we're generating that new growth and adding to the tax base. When you go over here, look at it in dollars. Well, they're getting $67,000 at OSED, but the public schools is $1.8 million. And this is a better demonstration. We like to talk in percentages, but when you look at the dollar amount, it's a lot different. So this here is some of the other budget lines that we have. The one that's hard to see is legal. So legal's decreasing. They are all hard to see. Legal's decreasing, elections decreasing, planning board, zoning board is 0, snow and ice is 0, and street lighting is 0. And you can see this again in dollars. So that was another 6 departments with reductions. And this one here is assessments, but you'll also see that reserve account where we have the increase. We're reserving the salary money for transfers after the negotiations. The transfers is where you would have seen the transfer for the Shea escrow account, so that's why that looks a little bit different. Our debt is going down because we're not adding anything to it this year because our capital is in free cash, and those are some of the high points there. Looks a little different again when you change it from percentages to dollar values. This is our typical chart to show tax bill impact. In FY26, we'll actually see that the increase of the tax bill is lower than it has been, and the tax rate is going down as well. But of course, that's at a cost. This is sort of what it's like to live within a forced limitation of a tax levy. So the increase will be lower and the rate will go down, but again, at a cost. So with the budget increase of 5.2%, which is just over $4 million, it's estimated that our tax bill for the average single-family home would go up by $345. And that is based on the estimated value of a single-family home being $676,423, which is a 67% increase since FY20. So in 5 years, we've had a 67% increase in the average single-family home value. In FY25, when you looked at this slide, we had estimated a 57% increase. In the tax recap, we saw 55%. So it was actually a little bit lower, but in FY20, that home value was $402,000, and again, $626 today. Or FY26 was $620. FY25, excuse me, was $626, and we're up to $676. Okay, I'm going to give Marissa a chance to talk. Ready? Hold on. You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, counselors. I'll have to say that I wish I could have gone first. It's kind of hard to go after the mayor and all of the information that you provided you, and I don't have as many colorful charts. So I will be presenting you with an overview of the capital improvement plan and the financial forecast for the city. If you're following on the budget book, I don't know if you have the budget book up, but the capital is actually on page 141 of the budget book. So the capital improvement plan section for this year is limited to the current year proposed capital projects recommended for funding. I know you're used to seeing more comprehensive capital plan, but we actually, for this particular fiscal year, we are just presenting what is proposed to be funded for the current year, because we have a plan to complete a comprehensive plan addressing multi-year capital needs in the upcoming fiscal year. The department heads are the most knowledgeable in their specific areas and are best suited to decide infrastructure and equipment needs associated with their department. Department heads were directed to submit capital requests and prioritize them based on urgency, impact, and available resources. And as I just mentioned, we do have a plan to complete a comprehensive plan, and the city will be applying for a grant to assist with the costs of preparing that plan. So the capital improvement plan is both a financial and infrastructure planning tool that sets forth a multi-year schedule and financing strategies to accomplishing public capital projects, identifies and prioritizes capital needs, funding capacity and sources, and the impact of these investments on the operating budget. A capital improvement plan is a best practice in long-term capital planning, budgeting, and asset maintenance planning. Capital assets are items such buildings, streets, and sidewalks. Oops, sorry, forgot to change the slide. Water and sewer infrastructure, technology, major equipment, all of these are essentials for providing services to our residents and businesses. And capital assets are expensive, from planning to construction to operations and maintenance. Developing a capital improvement plan that will ensure sound fiscal and capital planning requires effective leadership and cooperation of municipal departments. And as you all know, this is, with any planning document, this is a living document that needs constant updating as more information becomes available. These are based on estimates and information that we have at the time that the plan is created, but oftentimes when it's time to actually appropriate the funding for the project, those estimates could change. Some of the funding sources for the capital improvement plan. Funding of major capital projects is typically financed through issuance of long-term debt. These bonds are issued for time periods ranging between 5 and 30 years and the debt service payments for principal and interest are budgeted annually in the general fund and or the enterprise funds if these are enterprise fund projects. There are other funding sources also available. Some of the examples are the state and federal grants. Sometimes we're able to apply for some of these grants, and free cash is also a funding source. And this helps mitigate the impact on the taxpayers. For FY26, the city had to defer several capital needs due to fiscal constraints. And as the mayor mentioned, we did present the capital a little differently this year, and it is in a separate council order with a request to be funded from free cash. So, sorry. I'm going the wrong way. Okay. A complete, properly developed capital improvement plan has the following benefits. Facilitates coordination between capital needs and operating budgets, enhances the community's credit rating and control of its tax rate, deters sudden changes in debt service requirements, identifies the most economical means to finance capital projects, increases opportunities for obtaining federal and state funding, focuses attention on community objectives and fiscal capacity, keeps the public informed about future needs and projects, and encourages careful project planning and design to avoid costly mistakes and to help a community reach their desired goals. The criteria to determine which projects are funded in a particular fiscal year include, but are not limited to, the impact on public health and safety, impact on economic development, infrastructure needs, mandates of local, state, and federal regulations or laws, whether the project is a prerequisite to another project, improvement of productivity and efficiency, impact on operating budget, financial return or costs, and external funding sources available for the project. So the next couple of slides are actually from the budget book, and these are the projects that the mayor is recommended to be funded as part of the FY26 budget, and it is a request to have a free cash vote. So the first table, it's actually $1,813,975. And you will have the opportunity to question or have questions about these projects once you have a chance to go through them. There are some descriptions as part of this table, but if you have additional questions, you'll have the opportunity to ask the department heads when we have the budget hearings. The request number has the department that requested that project, so you will have that opportunity. And the next two slides are actually the sewer and the water enterprise funds projects. And these two tables, they're actually included as part of the total budgets for those two enterprise funds. So this is not a separate order. It's actually part of the total budget for the enterprise funds. All right. Okay. So now, as it relates to the financial forecast, again, if you're looking at your budget book, that is on page 40. The goal of the city financial forecast is to conservatively project revenues and expenditures 5 years into the future. The forecast is intended to provide policymakers with information they need to make informed decisions around the city's financial strategies and policies, long-term financial and capital planning, and long-term contracts and/or obligations. As new information becomes available, similar to the capital improvement plan, assumptions and estimates used will need to be reevaluated and see if they're still appropriate and reasonable. So you have the complete financial forecast on the budget book, and these are the assumptions that were used for this year's financial forecast. The new growth has been updated to reflect new economic development, which has a direct correlation with the real estate market. Debt exclusions are based on the debt service outpayment schedule for the two debt exclusions that we have borrowings for, the 2018 school building addition and then 2020 and 24 elementary school. State revenue is estimated to increase annually at the rate of 2%. Local receipts also estimated at 2%. And operating budgets estimated to increase at a rate between 3.6 and 5.7%. For this purpose, and these are very conservative numbers right here, we included salary and wages estimated at an increase at 3%. This is just for forecasting purposes, but the actual increases are based on steps, longevity, COLAs, and they're all based on the collective bargaining agreements and a COLA proposal for non-unions or individual contracts that some city officials have. Operating expenses are estimated to increase annually at a rate of 5%. The debt service payments are actually actual numbers based on the current outstanding bonds that the city has. So in the future, if we borrow additional long-term debt, then that number would change. State assessments are estimated to increase at a rate of 7%. As the mayor mentioned, we are at a much higher number. Employee benefits are also estimated to increase at a rate of 7%, and the transfers are actual based on actual numbers or estimated numbers in a way, but the OPEB transfer is based on the last actuarial valuation that was performed. We will have a new valuation completed this fiscal year because it's due every 2 years. And the diff is transfer is for the existing debt payments that we have as it relates to the outstanding debt on those projects. So the goal is to maintain a conservative approach and reasonably account for new growth based on prospective building projects. Focus on increasing other revenue through new economic development, and strive to build a conservative budget. Some of the financial fiscal challenges are meeting the needs of the city with limited revenue sources. City's budget, as once again the mayor mentioned in her presentation, relies heavily on the property tax revenue. For FY26 is 73.27%. It is a little lower than it was in the prior year, but it's still heavy reliance on taxpayers. And preparing a budget within the levy limit. And Prop 2.5 obviously is the challenge. And based on these conservative assumptions, which they change almost on a daily basis, the city would exhaust its levy limit in fiscal year 2027. I would like to mention that the projection does not include the use of free cash in fiscal year 2027. We are using $2.9 million in 26, include 1.1 for the operating budget and additional 1.8 for the capital. And personally, free cash should be for one-time expenses, and this reliance on free cash eventually will go away. I mean, you probably remember we had this discussion a couple of years ago when we were struggling with our enterprise funds because we kept using retained earnings over and over again to balance our budgets, and then we got to a year, there was nothing there to help us balance. And that's what would happen with free cash as well. Okay. So this is the bottom line. In summary, and based on the assumptions that I just went through, our excess levy capacity projected for 2027 would be over by about $1.7 million. And that is based on a 3.6% increase of our budget. And as you go through the years, that deficit just continues to grow. Now, we're not the only ones in this situation. This is a chart that shows the levy capacity for municipalities in Massachusetts, and you can see that we fall in the big chart there. Our 2025 excess levy capacity was 165 after it was approved, the tax rate, and puts us at 0.28%. There are 187 communities that have less than 1%, but as you can see, there are 261 communities that have less than 5% of excess levy capacity. This is just a new growth slide. The mayor already mentioned this, but this is just a chart to show you. And what is new growth? These are additions to the tax base from new construction and property improvements. We also rely heavily on this number because other than Prop 2.5, this is the other number that we have to play with. Quote. Question. So, okay, I think, okay. These two slides are informational slides. A lot of this information are actually in a slide that the mayor presented to you. I think that you went through what the tax levy is, the Prop 2.5, what's called the levy limit, and I think the ones that she might have not had on her slide is that a community can exceed its levy limit with voter approval. And that's why you probably have been hearing a lot about other communities going through overrides. So communities can levy above its levy limit permanently or temporarily by passing a majority vote in an election for override or a debt exclusion. The debt exclusions, we have the debt exclusion for the debt that I just mentioned. That's temporarily. Once the debt gets paid off, that's off the books. The override, it actually, it's permanent. By passing an override, then the community can assess taxes in excess of the automatic annual 2.5%. So funds can be used for both operating and capital expenses, and that's just an explanation of what an override means. And a debt exclusion, as I mentioned before, results in a temporary increase to the levy limit of a community. And I will leave the where do we go from here to the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa.
All right, we're almost there. Before I end on this note, I want to take the opportunity to thank our department heads and the team who has worked really hard on this. I think this is we sort of talk about March Madness in our world. March is when we really put ourselves behind closed doors and really crunch numbers. But then the 2 weeks sort of leading up to today, and as our department heads are preparing for their presentations, is just a whole nother level. It's the busiest time of year for us, and it's hard any year. This year in particular, really challenging. So, not just our department heads, but our CFO, with both CFOs. Cheryl's been helping too still. So Cheryl and Marissa, when she was helping from even across the pond, and Anne-Marie, our chief of staff, and William as our communications director, have done a ton of work to pull this together and make it look beautiful for you to have these great books and for everyone else to be able to view it online. There's a note in the letter that we have made an effort to make the digital communication ADA compliant based on case law that has come out, or court decision, the DOJ ruling. Thanks, that's why he's here. Again, every year we just strive to make improvements and do better. So huge shout out to the staff who did all this work. Thank you. So where do we go from here? We've been on quite a journey this evening. You've heard about how we build our budget and determine what our expenses are, but also have to determine what our revenue is and do those numbers match. And we are, the forecast that Marissa puts together with the 5 years, if you go back the last few years in your budget books, they have continually said that we will be in excess of our levy. And we come here and we balance, we make it work. And we do that by making reductions and cutting corners and, nip tuck everywhere we can. We're just working as hard as we can to increase that new growth number and increase the values so that we can pull from that and add that to the tax base. But there is a lot of pressure working against us, and there's going to be a decision to make as we approach FY27. This is unsustainable. If you look at that, just that free cash number that we're using, $2.9 million, that's a $3 million gap. And we can't keep doing that. There's not going to be $3 million there next year for us to use out of our free cash account. So there's two options when you think about what we can do next, right? We can decrease expenses or we can increase revenue. When you think about decreasing expenses, I think about finding efficiencies. We do that every day. We are always trying to do that. Our staff are always trying to do that. When we go to bid for new contracts, when we work with new vendors, when we implement new processes and software, and that is a constant piece of our work, is to find efficiency. The other is reductions, and that seems to be highly undesirable to people who live in this community, really unfavorable and unpopular. And again, you've heard sort of, I think anecdotally, we could all say we're hearing a lot about overrides. I think that when you go back to 2008, 2009, the reductions that could be made that were substantial, the outsourcing, the real sort of operational changes, they've been made. I know there's people out there saying, they've got to be able to reduce more, make cuts, change the way that we do business. There's not anything left to do in that regard. We are a people-first operation, and we need people to do that work. People want to know that when they walk up to the front doors of City Hall that they're going to be open. They want to know that the office is going to be open. They want to know that when they dial that phone number, someone's going to answer. And we need people to do the work that we do. We need laborers. We need engineers. We need architects. We need people to write plans. We need people to edit and copyright. There have to be people to do that. That's not going to be taken over by AI. It's not going to be taken over computers. We need people to do the work that we do. So reductions, again, on a larger scale, don't seem to be desirable. So the other option is to increase revenue. And we've talked about extensively tonight about the fact that we are at our levy. So I will be assembling a financial advisory board and bringing together core and critical personnel from across the city to talk about what that looks like and what it would mean for the people who live here to decide if they want to retain the level of services that we have, if they're willing to pay for them. And how we get there from here. We have to reduce our reliance on free cash, and there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in federal and state, at the federal and state level, and we know what we want here. The question is, are we willing to pay for it? So, to be continued, but we have presented you with a balanced and carefully crafted FY26 budget. And I thank you in advance for all of the time that you will spend in hearings and working with our department heads. Again, many thanks to them for getting this far. please ask questions and get into the weeds with us as we go forward. And I'll be at as many of them as I can, but we'll be back for the hearing and encourage the public to get involved as well. So, thank you.